thought and leadership. Rabbi Cosgrove isn't just a scholar and a deeply committed leader within the Jewish community and the conservative movement in particular, but I think he's someone that me and many other rabbis have come to hold in very high regard for the clarity and the conviction with which he articulates the aspirations of American Jewry. And that's in an age where constructive dialogue often feels impossible. That he's somebody who has consistently modeled a commitment to meaningful engagement within the Jewish community in its diversity and beyond the Jewish community as well. So this is his new book, For Such a Time as This on Being Jewish Today. The book is a reflection on the challenges and opportunities facing the Jewish community today and Jewish leadership in particular. It weaves together wisdom from Jewish tradition, but also has a very, I would say, bold and forward-looking view of how synagogues and leaders and individuals can rise and be a part of meeting the challenges of our time. I just want to remind everybody again, if you could please mute your microphones. Thank you. So I think through his writings and his sermons, and particularly through this book, Rabbi Cosgrove has been able to redefine in many ways what it means to be a thoughtful and engaged conservative Jew in a rapidly changing world. So tonight we're going to have the opportunity to hear from him about his work. I'm going to interview him a little bit, to hear from him about his vision for the role of the synagogue and how we can navigate some of the most pressing and difficult challenges and questions facing American Jewry, particular when it comes to this moment in Israel, and the challenges in Israel, questions about Jewish identity in today's day and age, and the broader challenge, I think, of maintaining unity among the Jewish people amidst diversity. And I think we'll hear some insights as well that are applicable to Canadian Jewry as much as it's applicable to the American story. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. I'm very happy to be with him tonight. He's coming to us from New York, but we are his, I believe, first Canadian. This is your Canadian debut, your international.
This is it. This is the very first one.
Okay.
And Rabbi Grover, I do want to point out and extend a huge thanks to the Beth Tikvah congregation, to you, Rabbi, to Gail, to the whole team there, because I think before even this book was published, you know, our friendship, and you reached out and you were gracious, and we had the chance to reconnect, and it's just a pleasure and an honor to be in dialogue with you, Rabbi, and with your community. So thank you.
Thank you. Look how many people are here. Wow, wonderful. Okay, you're bringing out a big crowd tonight. This is, let me start, Elliot, by talking about Purim and the way it figures in this book. This book is sort of framed around the Purim story, which I think, and I think you'd agree with me, is sort of the most underappreciated holiday when it comes to Jewish theology and its message. And here's a book that finally champions the idea that Purim is more than what meets the eye. In your own words, can you explain why you chose to put the Purim story at the heart of this work, which some people might say, what does Purim have to do with Israel and with Judaism today?
It's a great question, and it's a great way to frame not just the festival of Purim, which, as everyone knows, is not until the springtime, but also the book itself. And actually, what I'm very interested in doing in this conversation, Rabbi, is also my reflections on American Jewry as a compare from the United States to your experience for Canadian Jews, because the Purim story serves as the spine, the biblical backdrop of the tale that I tell, the tale that we've all been experiencing since October 7th. But really before that, it's a before, now, and some prescriptive steps after. And as you might remember, as people on the Zoom might remember from Hebrew school days, that the Jews of Shushan felt very comfortable in their diaspora existence. They felt that they could blend in what I call in the book, a hyphenated life, as the Persian Jews or Jewish Persians, that they could blend in and the going was good. And so much so that Esther hides her identity. That's what Esther means, to hide. And she ascended to the very heights of power as queen in the palace of Achashverosh. And she had it good. She had assimilated, if you will, into that existence. And then Haman's wicked decree came down. And by way of an emissary in chapter 4 of the book of Esther, Mordecai tells his niece Esther, don't think that you'll escape at this moment. And who knows if it was not for such a time as this that you've arrived at your station. And we know, because we celebrate Purim, that Esther rose up as a queen, as a woman, as a Jew, and Haman's plans were foiled and the Jews were victorious. So that backdrop is really what I argue was a story of the Jews that I serve in the United States, and in many ways the experience that we thought we were the exception. Yeah, there's anti-Semitism in Europe, and we know what happens in France, and we know what's happened for thousands of years. But Jews in the United States believed them to be exceptional in the sense that the historic hatreds that have afflicted our people since time immemorial, we were somehow different. And what happened on October 7th was this collective sense of whiplash, of, wow, these hatreds are there. Now, it was experienced differently. For some, a sense of, where did this come from? How did this happen? This pernicious and porous line. I'm not just talking about the attacks on Israelis on October 7th, but that porous line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, the hatreds that have appeared on campus and media and government sometimes, and in the world court. And others sort of wagged their finger and said, I told you so. You thought that it was different, but it was there all along. But whether we were surprised or whether we said, I told you so, we realized that at that moment, the Jews were othered. We were othered at that moment. And that call in trauma was a call to rise up, to have our Esther moment. And the tale that I tell in the book is the story of how we were attacked, how we were either surprised or affirmed, and then how in different ways we have risen up to serve the Jewish people in this time of need.
So it's a year later now. And this book is not about a moment that it's not a once upon a time kind of story. This book is still a reflection of the challenges of the Jewish community in North America in surprisingly resonant ways. Still 13, 14 months later, I really recommend everybody pick up a copy of the book, and it will speak to you on that day, depending on whatever the headlines are. I promise you there'll be something that you can connect to the themes of this book. So tell me, what are we, 14 months later? How do you assess the response of American Jewry to this moment? Are we living up to our Esther moment or not?
So first of all, just to that, the process of writing a book in real time is a very disorienting process. I mean, we are, I think, about 420 days in. We have the hostages are still hostages. The war has not abated. There's some news that maybe in the north there might be a deal to be made. But when I was writing it, and I started writing it in January, and I handed in the manuscript around May, I spoke to the publisher and I said, well, what happens if the war is over? What
Hmm.
happens if anti-Semitism comes and goes? What happens if, right? And I said I would forego any, I mean, there's no royalties. If you want to make money, you don't write a book to a Jewish audience. But I said I would forego it all if this all wound down. And as you're pointing out, Rabbi, the sad fact is, we know by looking at the news, is the war is still going, the hostages are still hostages, anti-Semitism in some cases is getting more, not less acute. I mean, we're seeing everything that I'm wrote about in the book is urgent in a way that I just wish it wasn't. I think that American Jews uh, have stepped up. And I want to be careful because when I say North American Jews, I know that there are distinctions between my community in the United States and yours, and I hope I get a chance to learn from yours experience as well. But in my synagogue, I'm in Manhattan at Park Avenue Synagogue. By any metric, there has been an increase in engagement. Now, that could be most immediately a rally outside of the UN, or going down to DC last year to affirm our support for Israel. People are, um, there's a term, an accidental activist, right? Normally, Rabbi, you and I know that we sort of volunteer people to get on committees. It's like pulling people in, roping them in. Here, someone says, Rabbi, why aren't we doing a thing for FIDF? Why aren't we doing a thing
Right.
for Hatzalah? Why aren't we doing a thing for Brothers in Arms or Brothers for Life? And I finally said, you know what? Just do it. Don't wait for the men's club to just have an event in your home and invite your 20 friends for, right? So I'm seeing this, some people call it the surge, some people call it October 8th Jews, some people call it the awakening, our tribal moment. It goes by different names, but but whether it's Hebrew school numbers, philanthropy, the big worry was that people would have to choose, am I going to support Israel or am I going to support my local synagogue or day school? People are stretching beyond what they thought capable of. And then I have a million quiet moments, and I'm sure you probably have those moments too. Are you in the rabbi's office, your office right now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in my office right now. I call these the rabbi's office moments. The couple where one of the partners was on the fence about converting to Judaism, and they decided now's the time. Now's the
Yeah.
time to double
Let's go with
down.
those cases.
I've had many of those moments that someone has quietly, come into my office. I had a young professional who said, you know what, I thought all those stories my parents told me about the need for Israel and historic anti-Semitism, I thought they were crazy. He says, now I realize I'm crazy
Hmm.
and wanted to get involved in synagogue life. So those have actually been the most tender moments. Obviously, the pews on a Friday night are amazing, but the quiet human stories are what have moved me most.
So I have to say, that's great to hear. Sometimes the impression we get north of the border, I mean, what you're saying is we have responded, the American Jewish community has responded in extraordinary ways. We've showed up, we've met our Esther moments. Sometimes the impression we get in Canada is that, yeah, the organized American Jewish community responded in that way. The people who were already involved and already invested, they responded powerfully. But particularly the younger generation,
Yeah.
they are still missing the boat. And actually, in many ways, we've been disappointed by their reaction because they backed away from their Jewish identities, maybe hid a little bit more. Is that resonant for you? Do you feel
It's a
that's
very important
accurate?
it's a very important textured question you're asking, Rabbi. And I actually have a chapter on a dialogue with a young woman who I assigned her the name Maya,
Maya.
because that's not her real name, but I have all my daughters, their friends are all four letters, two consonants, two vowels. Maya, Nomi, Tali, everything. And so I said, okay, I'm just naming her Maya. Um, and I joke that she shares half a brain with my daughter. There's something very personal about this book. I have four college-age kids thereabouts on liberal campuses in the United States, and their experience has been different.
Right.
They have to use language they've been alienated twice over because they have been horrified, as any person of conscience has been, by the atrocities of October 7th. But they've also been alienated. I'm forgetting what you called it, but I call it the OJC, the Organized Jewish
Yeah.
Community.
Yeah.
And because what we've done, and I don't know what the politic is in your community, but in the United States, um, we, over the last 100 years, have made Zionism, or assent with the Israeli government, which are two very different things, a substitute faith or right, it's become a compensatory religion for our religion. And I'm gonna answer your question, right. It's, this year, 1924, 100 years ago, the first Hadassah hospital was established, right? But Henrietta Zold actually said that important as Zionism was for the first immigrants to Israel and the Yishuv in pre-state Palestine, it was also an organizing principle for American Jewry, world Jewry, and that's a good thing. That was good for the Yishuv. It was good for North American Jews. However, over time, that organizing principle became a religion, that we believed that our support and engagement for the state of Israel it's easier to talk about, at what point uranium is or isn't nuclearized than it is to open up a Siddur. It's easier to call someone a colonialist oppressor or a self-hating Jew than it is to actually think about the Jewish identity of your children or grandchildren. It became sort of a civic faith of Jews, and then it became an orthodoxy for American Jewry. In the United States, Arthur Hertzberg of blessed memory once said that the only thing that you can be excommunicated for as an American Jew is dissent with the Israeli government. Now, why does this go back to your question? Because when we made assent with the Israeli government, the litmus test, the threshold of entry into the Jewish community, we lost a lot of Jews along the way because they saw that their liberal values, right? You can't, French philosopher once said that everyone's destined to live in the time into which they're born. And so if you're 23 today, the only prime minister you know is Netanyahu. The only policy you know is an expansionist policy in the West Bank. The only paradigm you have is Israel as a Goliath to the Palestinian David. That's their reality. And so they are appropriately horrified at October 7th, but they're also saying that this Israeli government doesn't represent their value system. And P.S., when you see hundreds of thousands of Israelis, as we did during the judicial reform protests, protesting the Israeli government, then you can't very well say that those, that it's somehow a betrayal of the cause to do so if hundreds of thousands are doing so out of love of country, right? It's an argument that doesn't hold. And by the way, that was all before October 7th, but it's just gotten more complicated. I can talk to you about, I'm going to pause because I realize as one rabbi talking to another, I don't pause.
No, no, no. This is
The,
great.
the, the question of how do you engage the Maya
Yeah.
generation is a critical one, and that's what that chapter is all about. But I'm just laying the groundwork that you're 1,000% right. Not all of American Jewry rose up to the Esther moment. Many of them felt alienated.
And uh, we got to talk about Maya because I get asked all the time by Maya's grandparents what to do about their Maya and how alienated he or she is feeling right now from the organized Jewish community, including their synagogues. I say this is a big problem, Rabbi, in the Canadian context because our synagogues tend to be quite intensely pro-Israel, and I'm not sure if any of the established congregations would really be comfortable places for people like Maya because we have, the Israeli flag on the bima. We're singing
Yeah,
Hatikva all the time. Every sermon is about Israel. Every fundraising effort is about Israel. That is, October the 7th has sort of exaggerated an impulse to love Israel that
yeah,
was already very strong. So how do we make room for Maya? What advice do you have for me to respond to that grandparent, and what's worked
right.
for you?
Okay, so that there I feel like I'm in therapy with you, Rabbi, because your problems are my problems. And this is a wonderful meeting of the hearts and souls, but there's 145 people listening in to our conversation. So there's two questions. One is the interpersonal and the other is the institutional. So from an interpersonal level, and by the way, not everyone agrees with me. I have colleagues who say you got to write off the Maya generation. They're
Right.
done. You can't deal with the non-Zionist Gen Zer in our midst. I disagree with that. I think that one needs to, I would recommend, I actually never asked you how you feel about this, but we need to have a big tent. That's the next generation. And so if someone says, oh, I don't believe in nationalism and I don't believe in the Jewish, Judaism for me is not about statehood, about sovereignty, about, an army and, blah, blah, blah. Say, okay, well, Maya, right? 47% of the Jewish people live in a hostile neighborhood with Iran's ring of fire around them. Okay? That's not invented. That's Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, existential threats that are not about a he said, she said, or where the Litani River is or isn't, right? They want Israel wiped off the map. I can give you a few examples, but so what is your prescriptive step for Jews to defend themselves?
Right.
And then do the most important thing of all, stop talking. Let the Maya of the world articulate his or her response to the question of Jewish safety and self-determination given their worldview. Now, let me tell you what I think might happen, or what won't happen. I don't think that person will say, I'm so glad we had this discussion. You're right. I'm wrong. Shake on it. Go on. 9 times out of 10, people don't respond to arguments that way. But this is what might happen. They might say, when they're back on campus, they might think twice about sitting in an encampment next to a placard that says from the river to the sea. They might be more intentional and circumspect about the use of their Jewish body and voice when it comes to exercising their dissent with Israel in a time of war. So I'm a big tenter. I look long on the Mayas of the world. The other question is a deeply, um, is one, every sermon is on Israel. Everything I do. We've all, since October 7th, we, meaning congregational rabbis, become de facto representatives for the policies of the Jewish state. And that's not why you went to rabbinical school or I
Right.
went to rabbinical school. I went because I love Shabbos and I want more people to do mitzvahs and I want people to be able to open up a chumash and pray out of a siddur, right? There are certain that's what drew us to this. And I worry about what is going to be the long-term effect of a Judaism that during this moment of crisis has been essentialized down to support for the state of Israel. And the best I can do, Rabbi, is say we have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time. I don't know how Canadians say that, but um, we have to do both because it was great to be a Jew on October 6th. It's great to be a Jew today,
Yeah.
and we need to, that I am seeing it, by the way, right? We have to support Jewish day schools. We have to support Jewish summer camp. We have to invite people over for Shabbos dinner. We have to let rabbis give sermons that are about the Parsha and not some veiled Talmudic comment on whether or not on Netanyahu and the ICC, right? You hired
Yes.
your rabbis to be champions of this thing called Judaism. And that's why we went into it. And for that, we should become supported.
It's hard. We had last night, we had Michael Rappaport speaking in the sanctuary, and the place was packed, 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 packed. And it was a wonderful program. And this morning I taught my adult ed class. It was a great class. I thought it was a great class. We had a nice crowd, 25 people. And I keep trying. I keep trying to listen to what you're saying and to redirect some of the reignited passions for Jewish identity that you referred to and say, okay, that's wonderful. Now do something with it. I mean, I'm happy that you're waving Israeli flags and you're going to rallies and you're screaming to release the hostages. That's all very important. But what's missing? Is there more? I need your advice. Is there more that can be done to connect the dots from that from the passion for Jewish national identity to Torah and mitzvot, which is, as you say, this at the heart of what we're supposed to be doing as rabbis in his synagogues.
Look, I think and you might have read that we just had a very divisive election here in the United States, right? So, all the more so when our Yiddishkeit becomes, overlaid with support for Israel, right? It gets very tricky. All the more so when you expect the rabbi to be speaking on, which, you know, to show his or her hand. I mean, this is
Right.
this is crazy stuff.
Especially you, because of the
Um,
audience you command. There's a lot of pressure to respond to what's in the headlines.
Right. Well, my Jews all agree with me on. I don't know. I imagine your community,
Of
that the
course.
Tikva congregation, everyone agrees with your politics. Um, so I actually don't think it's at odds with each other, and I think we need to play defense and offense at the same time. As I said, I think we need to double down on Jewish identity. I think that um, to be a stronger Zionist, we have to be better Jews, right? Maya doesn't keep me up. The Mayas of the world don't keep me up at night because I describe her in the chapter, which has a benefit of being true. She went to Jewish day school. She went to Jewish summer camp. You'd be crazy not to be a progressive at 21 or 22 years old. Everything the Mayas of the world are doing is age appropriate. And because she has, sociologists talk about a thick or a thin identity or the
Right.
stickiness, she's all in, right? So I think that the person that I worry about is not the Mayas of the world. I worry about the person who has um, no connection to
Yeah.
Jewish identity and then says, well, I don't like the last decision the Israeli government did, so I'm out, right? But if that young person is connected to Shabbat, to mitzvot, to, right, then that young person can weather policy differences, whatever, Israel does tomorrow. So I actually think it's, if you care about Israel, this is counter whatever, but if you really care about the next generation support for Israel, then you better care about their Judaism.
Well said. So nowadays, Rabbi, we have Mayas applying to rabbinical schools, and there's a controversy about whether um, feelings about Israel ought to be a litmus test or not for admission to uh, the rabbinical schools, and particularly the rabbinical schools of the conservative movement. What do you feel post October the 7th about the kinds of questions that we should be asking rabbinical school students about Israel that would be relevant to their admissions uh, to really determine their suitability? This is it's recorded, but I'll make sure Chancellor Schwartz doesn't get a
Um,
copy. Uh, I want you to speak freely, please, about the kinds of questions that you would say are appropriate or inappropriate to ask of entrance to rabbinical school, because this is the future of the conservative movement, and you know more than anybody
I,
about Zionism of the movement and about the challenges of rabbinical schools.
right. Well, in the spirit of our friendship, I should say, well, I'll answer the question if you answer the question first. Um, so you and I are both in the bleachers, right? I mean, I might be a little geographically closer, but I'm not party to any insider, conversations. I do teach at JTS
Right.
on one day a week, and so I see the minds that are being shaped there. And I have to say, I'm not just saying this whether it's recorded or not. I'm deeply impressed with them. I actually don't believe that any of the rabbinical students they're struggling in all the right ways. But I mean, so to your specific question, should there be some sort of form that whatever you call it, like a catechism that they have to agree to support the decisions of the Israeli government to be admitted? Absolutely not. I mean, I wouldn't ask that of a congregant. I wouldn't ask that of, right. The entry test, now I do think, and you and I um know some of these people. There is an interesting conversation going out right now. Our Yossi Klein Halevi has said something, written something to the fact that um institutions, right, in America, in the States, we have what's it called, Jewish Voices for Peace,
Right.
some sort of far, far left, sometimes anti-Zionist Jewish groups, those groups should not have a seat at the Jewish table. Now, the Mayas of the world who might hold a membership, right, we do engage with individual Jews, whatever their views are, because we don't excommunicate people. However, that doesn't mean, right, you have discretion as to who you invite into your synagogue, as do I. And not every organization is given a home, and not every organization gets to speak to rabbinical students, and not every organization gets to enter into a campus Hillel, right? Just, but the individuals maybe not. So that's a distinction that I've been mulling on lately. Like, can we make a distinction? But individuals, I don't think we don't excommunicate. It doesn't
And
get us anywhere.
And would you say that even for a student who says, I'm post-Zionist, I'm a non-Zionist, right? This is not just that I have differences with the decisions of Benjamin Netanyahu and the way he's running the war. I'm just a Jew invested in the American Jewish story and not in the state of Israel. Is there room for that kind of person in the rabbinical schools?
Look, I don't think there's anything wrong with a rabbinical school, a synagogue, right? I have no doubt that there are individuals who grew up in my synagogue, and you know me, I'm sort of unapologetic about my support for Israel. I'm also, by the way, not on Netanyahu's Christmas card list, right? I mean, I've tried to define a territory where one can be a Fabrenta Zionist and not confuse that with, you know, blind support for this or that Israeli government. I support Israelis and Israel. That's different than, okay, well, you get that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with me saying to a congregant or a rabbinical school saying to a would-be rabbi, and here it's whether it's JTS or anyone, I'm not in the room where it happens, but to say, we expect you to observe Shabbat. We expect you to observe Kashrut. We expect you to be married to a Jew. You can go through the list, and we are a Zionist institution, right? I actually don't know what it says in the JTS letterhead, but we support the right of Jews to self-determination in their indigenous homeland, which for me is a back of a napkin meaning of what being a Zionist is.
Right.
That's who we are. If that's not something you believe in, there are other rabbinical school options. Um, but we're not going to apologize for that being our expression of Jewish life and living. And that is what's taught in the classrooms. And you don't have to, if you don't stand for something, then you stand for nothing.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit, Rabbi, about the experience of American Jews post October 7th and the ongoing October 7th experience in Israel. I find the more I speak to my friends in Israel, uh, that we are in very different places emotionally. And it's true we're having a hard time here with anti-Semitism. And we told you there's been some incidents here in Canada recently, but we're not sending our husbands and our fathers and our sons to die on a battlefield and dealing with the collapse of an economy and challenged with ongoing rocket attacks.
Hmm.
They're, as much as we are connected, I feel very disconnected. Do you see the same thing? Are you worried at all that the two very different realities are breeding distance between the oceans in an unhealthy way for the future? That is, maybe even some disappointment that, yeah, American Jews are there with their checkbooks, but we're the ones paying with our lives and our blood.
So I think your description is accurate, but in the hierarchy of things I'm worried about, I want to sort of pinpoint your question. I'm not sure if a further distancing due to the differences of experiencing war firsthand and experiencing war from a distance in diaspora Jewry is my primary concern right now. And I want to think about it as I speak, but I think you're right. As I tell my congregants, the Middle East is not the Upper East Side, right? And we are not literally displaced and and under attack, whether that's in the north, in the south, bus rammings lately, threats from within. We're not sending our kids off into battle. Um, uh, my nieces and nephews are on the front right now. It's not a global Jewish family in an abstract sense, right? I know
Yep.
when my nephew is in Gaza and when he's home for the weekend or otherwise. Like, this is very real. I know that's not shared by everyone, but I'm sure many people on the Zoom right now have actual family who are in Israel, experiencing this firsthand. So, and so I think too, and I tell this story in the book, I talk about the invisible thread that connects diaspora Jewry to Israel, and that there are fundamental differences between an American Jewry that is with wide open borders and two oceans at the side of it, and et cetera, and an Israel that is, in a cholent pot, of surrounded by its enemies. There are going to be differences that emerge from those two different communities, and we have to make sure that we, sharing the faith that we do, our Judaism is recognizable to them and theirs to us. I tell the story in the book that, my daughter, who did a gap year in Israel, with a bunch of secular Israelis, came back deflated, because as a rabbi's daughter, product of Jewish day school, product of Jewish camping, everything about her identity is Israel centric. And then she spends a year with a bunch of Israelis who expend zero psychic energy on diaspora Jewry.
Hmm.
And she says, for this, she felt like she had been sold a false bill of goods on this sense of global Jewry. And
Right.
that, and then you send that kid to a liberal campus where she's then expected to defend the very decisions of the Israel that doesn't care or recognize her Judaism, right? So you can see, Rabbi, how complicated this is. But all of that, I don't think, is about the war. I think the war is something we haven't. We're still in it. We don't know what its long-term effects are going to be.
But are we in it? In what ways are we in it in this moment in North America? Maybe hone in on that a little bit. In
Look,
what
I'm
ways
worried
are
right now.
we involved in this
I'm
war?
worried. I'm worried that things are being normalized right now.
Right,
We're just in a time of war, right?
right.
I can track these things in anecdotal ways. In the first 6 months of this war, every single bar mitzvah speech had a
There you go.
qualifier of, while we are celebrating my simcha, I'm aware that our brothers and sisters in Israel, right? I don't hear
Right,
that every week now.
right.
Now, I don't begrudge any kid from, having their simcha, but it is this sense of, oh, we're just in a time of war, you know, as opposed to some sort of, um, there's probably something deeply human about how long a human soul can um, endure that, but we in North America have the privilege of tapping in and tapping out, which, if your son is serving in a unit in Gaza or in Lebanon, you cannot tap in or tap out. And so I think there is a fundamental difference. So I appreciate the point you're making.
So I'm going to ask one final question, Rabbi. But before I do, I want to invite those who are participating to submit any questions that they might like posed to Rabbi Cosgrove in the chat box that's at the bottom of the screen. And Gail is going to be reviewing the questions just to see if there's one that's particularly resonant. And if there is, she'll pose it if we have a few minutes left at the end. So please, if you have a question that you feel I haven't posed yet and that might be interesting for you, use that feature in the chat box. Uh, just give me a thumbs up, everybody, if it's working, if you can use that chat feature. Yes? Okay. So, Rabbi, it's a Thanksgiving week in the United States. I think uh, we're wondering about your feelings about America and its role in. You're laughing. You know what I'm going to ask you? America and its role in this challenging time for Israel in the future, as you see a transition take place in the American presidency, one that you've lived through before, but uh, you see the new administration taking shape. So I ask you to share your thoughts in whichever way you're comfortable. I know you can answer this thoughtfully.
Well, first of all, I have no idea what's going to happen. And there are those, I mean, this is literally playing out in the paper today, as this whole um, uh, potential ceasefire is happening with the North. Is that happening because Netanyahu knows that he only has the duration of the Biden administration until Trump comes in and says, you know, I'm this war ends today, and so he's got to do what he's got to do, or is it the opposite? I'm not a policy wonk in that sense. Um, and I do think that, you know, I'm probably not on any elected official's Christmas card list, but I'm pretty, I think, there are issues with the Biden-Harris administration. I think there are questions with the Trump administration. I think short term in a time of war, Israel needs all its friends, the friends it can get. I also think some of the appointees of the Trump administration are not those who are advocates for Palestinian self-determination. And as a
Right.
Zionist, as someone who believes in a Jewish democratic state of Israel, I'm a big believer that everyone needs a place to hang their hat. And if you care about the future of Israel, then you care about the Palestinian people. I don't think these are at odds with each other. I think they actually go hand in hand with each other. So,
But are you
no,
concerned, given that anti-Semitism is such a pressing issue in the United States? Are you concerned that a new president of who's made the statements about the Jewish community in America and particularly strong statements about the current Israeli government, are you worried about it squeezing the American Jewish community and perhaps leading it to face even more resistance?
I don't know. Are you?
Yeah.
I think
You know,
anytime
I'm a
Jews,
Zashtil kind of Jew. I don't like being in the headlines, and I
yeah,
feel
no,
like this
I think
is a time we're going to be in the headlines a lot more.
anytime that the Jews are used to score political points is
Right,
bad for the Jews.
right,
And so, on policy differences, I can critique the Trump administration and I've done so publicly in the paper when he preemptively, scapegoated the Jewish community should he lose.
right,
I said that's bad for the Jews, for him to do that. On the other hand, I don't know if you heard about what he came out with on college campuses. He said, if you guys don't clean up your act, we're going to start taxing your endowments. We're going to take away your money, and you're going to be subject to all sorts of violations of federal funding. I mean, no nonsense. And so it's an interesting time. We have some awkward and imperfect bedfellows right now, and
yeah,
um, I think we have to, and I think um, what I would say to the 147 screens is number one, don't tear each other apart, and number two, don't tear your rabbi apart. Because none of us have a crystal ball right now, and we all need to, I have a whole chapter about civil discourse in the book, right? The model of Hillel and Shammai, that, these two sages of our tradition who disagreed on everything, how you say the Shema, how you light your Chanukiah, how you do theology, ritual, everything. Yet, Hillel won most of the arguments, not because he was smarter, but because he stated and recognized the opinion of the other before asserting his own view. And
Mm.
I think, in our communities, right, I have a pretty split community when it comes to who voted for who. I don't know this for sure. I just measure it by my inbox. But I have a lot of Trumpers, and I have a lot of people who are involved in the Harris campaign, and they're all good Jews. They all care about the Jewish people. They have different views on what's best for the Jewish people. So we listen, we sit next to each other, we recognize that each others are entitled to their views, and we're all have a right to hold our views. No one's a self-hater. No one's a colonialist oppressor. We all have the best interests of our people at heart.
I can't tell you how refreshing it is, how nice it is to hear that message in a time of great division. Uh, uh, to hear the voice of a prominent leader in the American Jewish community call for civic dialogue, uh, it is I think a very powerful message leading up to the Thanksgiving holiday, and during a time where there's a lot of conflict about Israel and Jewish identity in our own families. So I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us tonight, Rabbi. Um, Let me just ask, Gail, are there a couple of questions that caught your attention in the chat box? I don't know if you can
Um,
unmute, Gail. Yeah, go ahead.
Sort of. I'm going to try and combine some questions.
Rabbi, are you okay answering a couple?
Yeah, I got
Okay.
just a couple. Let's take a few questions, Gail, and I'll try to
Okay.
wrap them into one to
It's
close it
just
up.
one question. I mean, personally, I just like to say thank you for this book. I enjoyed your personal reflections, and I came away from the book actually with more questions than answers, and I'm trying to still comprehend what's going on in the world, and it feels like it's completely upside down. But one of the themes here in the questions that I'm getting is, do you see that in North America, I think we're all concerned a lot with the anti-Semitism here in North America, particularly in Toronto. And we are a step away, whether it be New York or even Toronto, from something not good happening. Like what we saw in Amsterdam, do you feel that we're close to seeing that in North America? Because we haven't had a big, I mean, going other than 9/11, we haven't seen something like that, and that people are just feeling on the edge that something is about to happen.
Yeah. Well, please God, whatever fears we have do not materialize. But if the question from the community is, do I have fears? Yeah, of course I have fears. And I think that as much as I believe that a good Jew, a Zionist Jew, can be critical of the state of Israel, I think what we've all seen in the wake of October 7th is that anti-Zionism bleeds into anti-Semitism and Jewish institutions stand at the front line, right, of these fears. You see it with the horrific murder of the Chabad rabbi the other day that we're all reeling from. You see it in Amsterdam. You see it with graffiti on synagogues. You see it online. I make a distinction in my chapter on anti-Semitism about the higher and the lower anti-Semitism. And I talk about how, of course, it's not my distinction. It was Solomon Schechter who made this distinction, that there's thuggery, there's violent acts, verbal, online, on the streets, on campus. But then there's this softer, what Schechter called a higher, more genteel anti-Semitism. And that is when the lower anti-Semitism becomes normalized, when Israeli academics are disinvited from conferences, when film festivals disallow Israeli contributors, when publishing companies don't allow books to be published, when Hillels on campus are excluded from progressive conversations because by dint of being a Hillel, they are therefore Zionists and they are therefore colonialist right? They don't appear on the edge of a fist, but they are, the Amsterdam anti-Semitism was horrific, but what really upset me about it and scares me about it is the coverage that tried to sort of create some moral equivoc. I don't know how it was covered, Rabbi, in Canada.
Yes, we had the
It was
same
kind of
thing.
like
They asked
boys
for
will
it.
be boys.
Right.
This is what hoodlums do at soccer
Right.
matches, et cetera, et cetera. And that sort of veneer of acceptability is very dangerous. And that really scares me because the higher might start as a higher, but it makes kosher the lower, and there's a slide from one to the next, which is seamless. So um, I wish we gotta end on a higher note, but I think the question is well placed.
Thank you. That's it, rabbis.
Rabbi Cosgrove, thank you so much. We're ending on a high note because we had the opportunity to interview you, and that's a high note. And I wish you a happy holiday.
Thank
And
you, and to you
again,
and your community, and take care of your rabbi. It's the best resource you have.
I paid him to say that, everybody. uh, so thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Come to Minyan tomorrow morning. Take care. Have a good night.